Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Ursula Bielski, and this is Uncanny Catholic, where we look at the often spooky elements of the Catholic faith and its history and delve into the stranger side of God's creation, both seen and unseen. As you probably know, I've lived in Chicago my entire life, and I've been documenting for decades the true crimes and hauntings of this city, which has many, many of both. Partly because it's Chicago and partly because of the sheer intensity of these cases and of the people behind them. These are not exactly local stories. They're world famous and they involve some of the most infamous Americans who've ever lived. Well, this week on my ghost story channel, The Ghost Lorist, I'm reading a piece about a man they call America's first serial killer. And that's, of course, H H Holmes. Now, Holmes preyed on visitors to the World's Fair of 1893. This was one of the most pivotal events in modern history, and it influenced every sphere and discipline of human endeavor from art and architecture to science and technology to religion and beyond. And I'll put a link to that episode below if you want to hear the whole story of H H Holmes and the story of the strange ghost and haunting stories that are connected to his life and all the deaths that he brought about on the south side of Chicago. Holmes spent years conducting insurance fraud schemes, killing people, even his wives and his own accomplices, and collecting the insurance money. And after he was arrested, not for murder, but for insurance fraud, police entered his World's Fair hotel that he had built in the South Side Chicago neighborhood of Englewood. And they found all kinds of evidence of his murders, as well as torture devices, homemade gas chambers, vats of acid and lime. They found that Holmes had built this murder castle, as it became known, with ever changing teams of workers so that no man knew exactly what it looked like inside except Holmes himself. But it was like a fun house inside, but without the fun, of course. I was intrigued to find out years ago that some locals in Englewood believe that Holmes sort of cursed the neighborhood because of the terrible things that he did. And that's why the neighborhood today is one of the most notorious and crime ridden, literally, in the entire world. So I'm talking on the Ghost Lorist this week about all the ghosts and hauntings connected to Holmes. But on this show, I want to talk about something very specific. And that's the fact that some believe that there is a Holmes curse that went into action after Holmes' execution. That is, that after his own death, Holmes preyed on the people that brought him down, and that it actually led to the severe illnesses and even deaths of many of the people that had conspired to bring him to justice. As mentioned, Holmes was arrested for insurance fraud, but eventually he was tried for murder. After his capture, Holmes confessed to killing 27 people in the murder castle, only a fraction of which police were able to confirm. Many historians believe that he may have killed upwards of 100 or even upwards of 200 people over the years. Site of the murder castle has never been excavated, and there is a post office that stands on the property right next to where that vacant lot is today, but more on that in just a moment. Holmes was sentenced to death in Philadelphia, hanged to the relief of the nation and the world, but particularly Chicago, where he had done so much of his dirty work. Some claim that at the moment of his hanging, Holmes cried out that he was the notorious London killer, Jack the Ripper. Others said that when Holmes's neck snapped, at that very moment, a bolt of lightning struck on the horizon, which was a very beautiful, clear spring day. The fact that Holmes remained alive with a broken neck for nearly 15 minutes after the execution fueled a belief that his evil spirit was too strong to die, leading to this rumor of a Holmes curse. So, what was the Holmes curse and who was involved? Well, let's take a look at its supposed victims. Dr. William Matten, a forensics expert who had testified against Holmes, soon died of unexplained blood poisoning. Next, Holmes's prison superintendent committed suicide. Then, the trial judge and the head coroner were diagnosed with terminal diseases. Not much later, Frank Geyer himself The Pinkerton operative who had tracked Holmes down, leading to his arrest, he fell mysteriously ill. A priest who had visited Holmes in his holding cell before the execution was found beaten to death in the courtyard of his church, which we'll talk much more about in a minute. And the jury foreman in the trial was mysteriously electrocuted. Strangest of all was an unexplained fire at the office of the insurance company that had, in the end, done Holmes in. While the entire office was destroyed in the fire, untouched were a copy of Holmes's arrest warrant and a packet of photographs of Holmes himself. This eerie string of Holmes-related deaths stretched well into the 20th century, ending in the 1910 suicide of former employee Pat Quinlan, who many believed had aided Holmes in the evil enterprises of the murder castle. Those close to Quinlan told reporters that the death had been long in coming. For years, they said, Quinlan had been literally haunted, plagued with insomnia, and driven at last to the edge and over. Some still say that it was Holmes himself that had haunted the man, and that the monster of 63rd Street, as many called Holmes, had finally gone away, taking with him Quinlan, the one person who could reveal all the secret horrors of Holmes's brutal heart. A few years ago now, I produced a show called The Hauntings of Chicago for PBS Chicago station WYCC. And our team interviewed postal employees on the staff at the Englewood branch of the United States Postal Service. There is a branch of the post office that was built right next to where the murder castle stood. The property there was torn down in 1938, and that's the time that the post office dates to. Several employees that we interviewed told us that there have been many strange goings on in the post office building, especially in the basement, which some say shares a foundational wall of the original murder castle, which stood right next door. One employee told us that she had been down in the basement on one occasion, and she was doing some work when she heard a sound around the corner. She poked her head around the corner to see if a colleague was there. She called out, but no one answered, and she saw nothing down that hall but the usual row of chairs that was along the wall. She went back to her work, and a minute later, she came back around when she'd finished, and she saw in that hallway that all of those chairs had been jacked up one upon another, just in an impossible fashion. They also told us that they frequently hear the sound of a woman singing or humming, and even see the apparition of a woman dressed in Victorian clothing in all different parts of the post office building. Most compelling of all, I think, have been the experiences of Holmes's own descendant, a man named Jeff Mudgett. As you might know, Holmes's real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, although he had many aliases, including the infamous one that we know him by today. At any rate, his descendant Jeff visited the site numerous times since discovering the gruesome ancestor in his family tree. In fact, he was part of our PBS show when we filmed it, which is how I got to be friends with him. So I learned the amazing story of Jeff's discovery of his heritage, which he wrote about in a book called Bloodstains. And it's a great book. I'll put the link down below so you can check it out. As you can imagine, Jeff's world was just shattered when he found out who he was. And he felt he had to figure out how to make this grace in his life somehow and do something to help some of these victims. So he went on to try and discover the identities of as many of his ancestors' victims as he could, to try and help the many families that still don't know if their family members that went missing so many years ago became one of Holmes's victims during the World's Fair. Jeff Mudgett also went on to pursue Holmes's chilling death row claim that he was London killer Jack the Ripper. The beginnings of that search are documented in the History Channel's miniseries American Ripper, which culminates in the exhumation of Holmes's body from his grave in Holy Cross Cemetery in Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. I'm not going to give away what they found, but they did that because many people believe it was an imposter who was executed and not Holmes himself. So they wanted to determine, using Jeff's DNA, if this was really his ancestor. Part of Jeff's plans also include the exhumation of the murder castle site and the placement of a memorial plaque there. None of those have happened yet. When Jeff first visited the site of the murder castle, employees of the post office told him when he asked to go down in the basement, they said, "Don't go down there. It's a terrible, haunted place." He did go down and he experienced severe physical and emotional effects from the visit, including a seizure after he had not had a seizure in many, many years. He told me, and this is a quote, "Before I walked down those steps, I was a non believer, absolutely none. I would have walked into any building in the world. But an hour later, when I came out, my whole foundation had changed. I was a believer." In recent years, I came across a fact that I'd forgotten, that there were news stories right before Holmes's execution saying that he had become a Catholic. And I'm going to read you one of the stories from the paper of the time. And here's the headline: "Holmes is a Catholic. Doomed murderer confirmed and baptized. Is evidently much impressed. The fact of Holmes embracing the Catholic faith may be taken as an indication that he will not attempt suicide." This is from the papers in Philadelphia in April 17th of that year. H H Holmes has been baptized and received into the Catholic Church. The ceremony was performed by Reverend P.S. Daly, pastor of the Church of the Annunciation, within the four walls of Holmes' cell of the prison. Besides Holmes and Father Daly, there were present Reverend Fathers de Cantillon, Higgins, and McCabe. The white surplice and stole, which are always worn during the Catholic baptismal service, had been brought to the prison wrapped in a small package. These were donned by Father Daly, who then proceeded to receive from Holmes the confession of faith which is required of those who enter the Catholic faith. The condemned man went through the ceremony slowly and solemnly and with every evidence of sincerity. His responses were made in a firm voice, and his eyes seldom wandered from Father Daly's face. Then followed the baptism, as is often done in cases of persons received into the Catholic Church who have been baptized in the Protestant faith. The baptism was made conditional. When Father Daly placed the stole upon the condemned man's head, the latter stood erect and rigid, evidently impressed by the sacred nature of the act. With solemnity ringing in every tone of his voice, the priest pronounced the words of the baptismal rites and sprinkled the typifying water upon Holmes. The ceremony was then over, and the man, who had but a little over 3 weeks to live, had become a member of the church, one of whose faithful representatives had been his clerical source of comfort and consolation since the words of his death warrant fell upon his ears. The reporter then goes on to talk about the fact that now that Holmes is Catholic, he will not be allowed by his new faith to commit suicide, which a lot of people were positing that they felt he was going to do. So, of course, the Catholic faith would not allow him to take his own life. So now he would have to wait until his execution. Another interesting story came to light just a few years ago when a New Jersey couple went to reporters with news that they had found a Bible owned by H H Holmes. Here's that story, and this is from NBC News' affiliate in Philadelphia, Channel 10. This was reported in 2017. A New Jersey couple is speaking out after they say they found a handwritten note signed by America's first serial killer inside a family Bible. Claire Fennell told NBC 10 she was cleaning out her mother's old books when she stumbled upon a well-worn Bible. She said, "The Bible was in a box I was going through. We just assumed it was an interesting Bible." As Fennell's son read the newspaper stuffed inside, she came across an inscription. It was a note signed with the distinctive signature of notorious serial killer H H Holmes, a man who admitted to killing at least 27 people in the 19th century. "The two of us look at each other like, this is weird," Fennell said. I think. Fennell had watched NBC 10's recent report on the family members of Holmes who had exhumed his body at the Yeadon Cemetery. nearby. They're trying to verify family lore that Holmes somehow swindled out of his own execution at the Moyamansing prison in South Philadelphia. The Bible Fennell found belonged to the first cousin of her great-grandfather, Father Patrick J. Daly, a Catholic priest at the turn of the century. Of course, the priest who ministered to Holmes and who apparently baptized him and brought him into the Catholic faith. Church records indicate that Daly worked at the Annunciation Church around the corner from the site of the old prison. When he came to walk him to the gallows, he probably handed him the Bible back with that inscription in it, Fennell said. That inscription, written in the heavy lettering of Holmes, may provide new clues about him. It says, "Dear Father Daly, I must write and make you know the feelings I have for you," Claire's husband, Larry Fennell, said. The middle of the note is indecipherable. It then concludes with, "I need your prayers after my death. With all of my heart, H. H. Holmes, May 7th, 1896. That was the exact day of Holmes's execution. So, how can we look now at the events that followed Holmes's death? All of those mysterious illnesses, suicides, and deaths that occurred to all of those people that had been involved in bringing him to justice and believed that it was an evil spirit of Holmes that was conducting these strange after death operations. If we believe the news stories that Holmes became a Catholic just weeks before his death, if he confessed his sins to Father Daly, and if he was baptized and likely received the Holy Eucharist, how can it be possible that Holmes's damned spirit somehow carried out these terrible crimes on the living after his execution, particularly on the priest who had brought him to the freedom of Jesus? Is it possible that the devil was so angry about Holmes's salvation before his own death that he killed? I think that's a distinct possibility. Holmes, of course, was a great prize for the devil. He had committed these atrocious crimes for his entire life. The news of the day up until this day was that Holmes was unrepentant. He wasn't sorry at all for anything that he had done, just, of course, sorry that he had gotten caught. But the revelation that Holmes converted to Catholicism right before his death really sheds an entire different light on this person. Unfortunately, however, Holmes did not make it to the gallows without sinning again. In fact, he lied in front of the crowd gathered for his execution and the entire world, claiming that he was innocent of all of the crimes that he'd been accused of. Was this a last minute moment of his personality rearing its ugly head? That, of course, wasn't instantly gone after his conversion? Or was his entire conversion just false, just fake, and just a lie, like so many other things that he said and did in life? We may never know. Do we have to look now at Holmes in a different way? And do we have to start, I dare say, praying for the soul of H. H. Holmes, apparently a fellow Catholic who's maybe, probably, likely still in purgatory? So let me know what you think in the comments about this bizarre development in the Holmes story and what you think about this case. And let me know what else you want to hear about on this channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell to get notified when we have new episodes of Uncanny Catholic right here on World of the Supernatural. Thanks for being with me here today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time. Until then, remember to pray for ghosts, including the spirit of H. H. Holmes. See you next time.